We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. It's Wednesday, March 25th, 2026, and we got a lot to get to today. It's a little bit of a weird Wednesday. We've got Minnesota Medicaid funds are under attack per NPR. We're scaling back the Department of Education. Government hated Microsoft software and yet approved it anyway. We're deporting members of the military. Question of how to get big tech to pay for your electric bills, trigger warnings on Shakespeare, and investigating crime in Antarctica. So let's get after it. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, and that is no exception for the first story I want to get to today. We are full on American Radicals Podcast. Rules in effect. The sweet meteor of death might come at any instant, so we got to have some dessert first. And I want to introduce you to the strangest, most bizarre headline that I have ever seen. And look, I take it upon myself to rarely use words like always and never. Notice how I didn't say never use always and never, but I don't think I've ever seen a stranger story than this. It's from a local Fox affiliate on a weird Wednesday. Headline: quadruple amputee, professional cornhole player facing murder charges. Yes, we have to start with the sad story, yet simultaneously hilarious story of one Dayton James Weber. Dayton Weber picked up two witnesses from work in a vehicle with the victim in the case, whose name is Bradrick Wells, already in the front passenger seat. So Dayton, although he has no arms, no legs, was driving a vehicle, and Bradrick was sitting shotgun. So they started to have an argument, and Dayton pulls out a firearm, shoots Wells in the head 2 times, then pulls the vehicle over, tells the two witnesses, hey, dump that body on the side of the road. They refuse, get out, flag down a police officer, and report it. And then later on, the victim's body was found on the side of the road. So a pretty egregious and violent going on there, incidents. But at the same time, he's got no arms and no legs. So I got a couple of questions. One, where was he secreting this firearm? 2, how did he operate the firearm? How did he operate the vehicle? How was he playing cornhole professionally? Well, those questions were raised in the article themselves. They say, look, the police didn't give us the full details, but some journalism went on in the online space, and we got at least one of the answers, because there is a video of our suspect here, Dayton Weber, firing a firearm with no arms and no legs. Let's give this a play.
Let me get you a strong.
Dayton, you need to put some ear protection and eye protection on. You've already lost 4 limbs. I'd hate to see you lose more than that, and now you might be losing your freedom. All right, let's get to some more serious stuff. And I want to begin over at NPR, which has a sad story that Medicaid, i.e. government welfare, that the government steals money from you, I mean taxes it, in order to send to other people, redistributing wealth, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Medicaid could be under threat of being lost in the state of Minnesota because of all the fraud that nobody is talking about anymore. So the headline from NPR: the threats to Minnesota's Medicaid funds are unprecedented. It's like saying always and never. Other states could be next. This is actually one of the rare circumstances where there's some modicum of accountability from the federal government on fraud. So we're going to deal with this organization, which Dr. Oz runs, called the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. Now, for those who don't know, federal government actually works with the states to fund Medicaid. It's this relationship between the feds and the states, and it often deals with reimbursements and also with funding them ahead of time. But because of the fraud that went on, or it's alleged to have gone on in Minnesota, CMS has now said, look, we're going to pull your funding, Minnesota. We're going to pull it two different ways. One, we're not going to reimburse you for the expenses that you've already incurred until you give us some report of how those funds were spent, some accountability. You have to do an audit so that we know that it didn't just go to a bunch of Somalis who sent it back to Somalia. Now, that money that Minnesota has already incurred, its taxpayers are already out of pocket for, is like $260 million. Secondly, CMS has told Minnesota, we're not going to give you any money going forward until we get a certain amount of action steps, a plan from the governor, Tim Walz. Tim A. Walz, former candidate for the vice presidency. He's a nice photo of him there you see in this NPR article. That guy's hair is always out of place. I don't understand the appeal. I know they try to go for the everyman thing with that guy, but he just doesn't have it. He's got the jazz hands. And look, I got to go be honest. My radar is up for the pedo stuff on him, talking about his traveling abroad to China for reasons and whatever. Tim Walz, we need you to give us a plan, Dr. Oz says to him, to make sure that you're going to spend the money responsibly. Tim Walz gives him a plan, and it's kind of a hot mess, very much like Tim Walz's hairstyle. So as a result, now $2 billion of your money that's been stolen, I mean taxed, is going to be held back from Minnesota. So they're having to pass through their budget process, and now they're out $2.2 billion. And NPR is very concerned because other states could be on the hook here. Look, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. The government from a federal level at this point actually did something that's not the best, not great, but good, at least, actually demanding some level of accountability, holding the line on it. Other states are going to be California, New York, and Maine, where there's been other reports of rampant abuse, fraud, and waste, fraud, abuse. Lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my. All right. How about another government program where we're going to talk about the truth behind it? Again, from NPR. This is about federal student loans. Federal student loans will move to the Treasury Department, and that's from the Education Department. This has been touted as a big, giant win in the conservative space and the MAGA right, RITE. It's kind of a religious cult at this point. But let's talk about what the mechanisms are and what, in effect, is actually going on here. So this is a quote from the Secretary of Education, one Linda McMahon, Mrs. Professional Wrestling. Quote from Secretary McMahon. As the federal student aid portfolio soars to nearly $1.7 trillion, pause, 1.7 trillion with the T, 1,000 billion that American citizens owe back to you, the taxpayer, because your government loaned them the money to go and get an underwater basket weaving degree after having indoctrinated them for 12 years in public education to say that if they didn't get that underwater basket weaving degree, they would wind up being a barista, which they wound up being anyway. But back to Secretary McMahon. There's nearly a quarter of student loan borrowers in default. Americans know that the Department of Education has failed to effectively manage and deliver these critical programs. And now they're excited to see the student loan programs be shifted over to the Treasury Department. There's 40 million Americans who owe from borrowing federal student loans. 9.2 million of them are in default. 2.4 are kind of close to being in default. So more than a quarter of American federal student loan borrowers are not going to be able to pay back the sum of money, or at least it's heading that way. And shockingly, you can't bankrupt student loans, right? They're not private loans, they're federal loans. You can only get out of it by paying it or dying. That's it. It's almost like the government kind of trapped you into that, right? They through the public education system, which the Department of Education has these golden handcuffs to control curriculum and the direction that all of these public schools, K through 12, go. They've been able to indoctrinate all of the students for decades, through generations, to believe that college was the only route possible to a successful financial status in your latter years. So incur this debt that we conveniently are going to offer you with basically no scrutiny. We're like the people in Minnesota with Medicaid. We're just going to say, you get a loan and you get a loan. Who cares about your academic background? Who cares what sort of degree you're going to pursue? You can have $250,000 of debt and then pay it back for the rest of your life because you can't get out of it. It's like a trap, right? Now, it's also a trap that's associated with the exponential explosion in college tuition costs. How long has the federal government been offering federal loans for people to go to college? Is it in the original social compact that we memorialize in a pesky, dusty document? Maybe it's in the invisible ink on the back of the Declaration of Independence? No, actually, since about 1957. So hardly a brain trust of Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. 1957. That's when the American government got involved in student loans. It was mostly because of the space race. We were looking at the cosmonauts and they were making more progress than us, and we got to get to the moon. So let's encourage people to go into STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And the government said, look, this is a worthy cause for us. We're going to get in that business. And as a result of the government getting into that business, the college tuition prices have exploded. It's 300% inflation, 3 to 4 times greater than the general inflation, which we are all suffering the effects of. Because once you have that guarantee of the government money and you're a university, you just keep jacking up the price. You know that the students have been indoctrinated. They're going to come no matter what, and they're going to get that loan no matter what because there's no accountability. So let's just continue to escalate the prices and the accoutrements. And it becomes a bidding war because you want to attract the students to come and pay the exorbitant prices. So you got to offer them some goodies, which is why you get like a lazy river at LSU and rock climbing walls and all these esteemed, austere places of learning, which are basically just a 4-year party experience for a lot of students. They're not really learning anything. They're being indoctrinated at best into some sort of misguided belief that from each according to his ability, each according to his needs, is really what the founding fathers were all about. Let's pivot over to something else now, and we kind of gave a little bit of a helmet sticker to our federal government. We pulled it back with the federal loans because they continue to give out those loans. And look, as long as we're going to say, hey, high fives, we're getting rid of the Department of Education. Isn't that great, Steve? No, not if you take all of the funding and responsibilities and just assign it to a different agency. That's just rearranging decks around the Titanic. What would make sense would be to get out of student loans entirely, get out of the business of education entirely. We're not doing that, though. So we'll rip those helmet stickers away. And let's give some further demerits on this story that I found from ProPublica. And it is long. I will put the link in the show notes for today. We won't go too deep into it, but it shows some corruption, it shows some incompetence, and it's about Microsoft and a product and their cloud software, about it being insufficient, and yet it was passed on through and implemented government-wide. So the title of the piece: Federal cyber experts thought Microsoft's cloud was, quote, a pile of bleep, but they approved it anyhow. So the government agency that you should know is called FedRAMP. That stands for Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. And the Microsoft program, this cloud computing software, it's Microsoft's Government Community Cloud High, GCC High. I want to make sure that we lay those out to begin with. GCC High. Refresh, not CCC. Government Community Cloud High, GCC High, and Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program, FedRAMP. FedRAMP essentially assesses the different cyber tools that various private entities are trying to pitch to the government. Hey, use our tool, give us that sweet, sweet government cash. We want that contract. FedRAMP looks at it. Microsoft was one of those private institutions that said, we got some great cloud computing software. And FedRAMP looked at it, and it didn't get a lot of feedback from Microsoft. Every time they were asking questions saying like, hey, we are worried about encryption. We're dealing with some top secret stuff here. Can you kind of lay out for us how when you send it from one device to another device that it remains encrypted? We don't want the Chinese getting that. And Microsoft, they kept putting it off. They couldn't quite provide the answers. And the process took a long time. It took so long that the policy at the time was, well, while the process is going on, we can start to implement it. So even though this process of assessing whether or not Microsoft's product was any good, it was still implemented government-wide. Well, not government-wide. It started with just like these podunk agencies that don't matter, like the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense, now Department of War. Those sorts of outlets that don't handle anything that's sensitive, that might be of interest to a nefarious geopolitical rival like China or Iran or North Korea or Russia. No, we don't need to worry about that. So FedRAMP does an assessment of Microsoft. Starts in 2020. And by the time they get done with it, it had already been used across all of Washington, chief amongst them, the Department of Justice, which ironically had started up a task force, I guess, to look into the way that there was cybersecurity measures going on. The ultimate arbiter of whether cloud providers or their third-party assessors were living up to their claims was up to the Justice Department for the government. And they had implemented this faulty service, which resulted in hacks, and the Chinese got a bunch of very sensitive information. Now, who was working at the Department of Justice when this was going on? There was a woman, the Deputy Attorney General. Her name is Lisa Monaco. Deputy Attorney General, she launched the DOJ's initiative to pursue cybersecurity fraud. And because the DOJ was the arbiter of whether or not this cloud computing software was any good or not, and they had implemented it, they didn't want to make themselves look bad because they had brought about a faulty system. They just said, good enough for government work. Let's implement it government-wide. Lisa Monaco, she's a dyed-in-the-wool communist. So when the Trump administration Part 2 came in, she left and she went to a retirement job, I guess, or at least a temporary spot for herself until the Democrats get back into power. And then she'll probably be on the short list to become the Attorney General of the United States. But what is her landing spot? Microsoft. She went to work for Microsoft in their cyber security apparatus. No corruption going on there, right? Is anybody going to look into that? Microsoft has said, well, we followed all of our rigorous programs and protocols to make sure that there was no sort of problems that would have went on, that nothing unethical afoot here at all. Lisa Monaco found herself over at Microsoft. Meanwhile, the FedRAMP, this government entity that was supposed to be doing these assessments to make sure that the money that is stolen from you, I mean taxed, was spent on good software. They've been scaled back. And ProPublica tends to lean left. They're very upset about the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, having scaled back FedRAMP. It's now a couple dozen people. They have a budget of a couple $1 million, and they are essentially a rubber stamp for anybody who pitches a product to the government at this point. Okay, that's big tech. Let's stay on big tech. Who's feeling the pinch with electricity bills? We went into a bunch of that stuff yesterday. I'm not going to go too deep into it today, but alarm bells are ringing on this one. This is a story from the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness. How to get big tech to pay your energy bills. They're just interested in helping you out over at the WAPO and at big tech. Google, Meta and others have resorted to modified jet engines, diesel generators, rebooting nuclear facilities and coal plants to power their data centers. Data centers are high drama right now. People do not like these data centers in their area because they're sucking up all the juice and jacking up energy prices. Actually, electricity prices have gone up 42% in the last 5 years. Now, there's been pledges by these big tech companies. We pinky swear, promise, cross our heart, hope to die, stick a needle in our eye that we will not jack up our prices to pass on the higher electricity prices that we are incurring because we have to keep our data centers running. We will not pass on those costs to our consumers. Right, right. They're not worth billions of dollars because they're dumb. They're passing on the costs to you. So, on top of taking on additional electricity prices, you're having to pay more for the technology that you're using. But Washington Post has a story here about ways that you can bring down your own costs and at the same time help out big tech because they came up with a workaround. They want to do what they're calling a virtual power plant. So, here's the idea. Big tech will connect to your house. They'll actually pay for, or at least lease you, a home battery system. And then that home battery, if there's hundreds and thousands of homes that are all connected to this virtual power plant, will generate electricity and give it back to the system so that the big tech can use it. All you have to do is sign up to get your leased home battery system. Oh, and also make sure that all your devices at home are smart devices that are also linked to big tech so that they can suck energy from those when you're not using them. They'll compensate you for it. That way we don't have to build brand new coal facilities or nuclear facilities. It'll be a community effort, right? It takes a village in order to stand up a big tech operation. And I'm sure, much in line with the way that they've pinky swore, promise to God, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye, we will not raise our prices on you. I'm sure when they get access to your private smart devices like your refrigerator or your toaster oven or your microwave, that there will be no data that they're going to also suck up there. So Washington Post is either living in naivete or maybe they have that's right. They have an ownership interest that comes from this guy named Jeff Bezos. Big tech, Amazon, trying to encourage you to give over your data to big tech. Come on, guys. It doesn't take a 300 IQ to come up with the corruption that's attached to this. Let's talk about some illegal immigration. Let's talk about some illegal aliens because the New York Times is trying to pull on your heartstrings. I cautioned after Donald Trump got elected the second time that the stories were already written. They were going to be sob stories. Abuela, she's missing a leg like the guy who killed the person in the first story that we covered because of her diabetes. And the CMS, they'd already pulled funding because of the illegal aliens, and she wasn't going to be able to get her treatment. Don't you feel bad for Abuela and her granddaughter who's working 3 jobs under the table in order to get her medication? No, they all got to go. So what's the newest sob story that the New York Times, at one point a newspaper, is going to put out there for you? Headline: 34 former military members were put on deportation track in the past year. Don't you love the troops? How dare you? So there have been 34 deportations, 125 arrests, and 248 relatives of military members who have been put into deportation. The sob story they use is this guy named Sai Jun Park. He left Hawaii for South Korea about 10 months ago under threat of deportation. He earned a Purple Heart during his military service. He was deployed to Panama in 1989. He returned with some PTSD. I don't know why he would have gotten PTSD in Panama, but he's claiming it, I guess, to get some bennies. So in the following years after he came back serving our country, he was convicted of a drug possession, and then he missed a bail hearing, and he went back to prison. And then when he was released, he fought his deportation, and they said, hey, keep your nose clean, keep checking in with immigration officials, and you can stay in America. And then the Trump administration, because Donald Trump is mean, orange, and literally Hitler, came in, swept into office, and said that policy's got to go. We were elected on a mandate of mass deportations, so we don't care if you served in the military, you have committed further criminal offenses, you are lined up for deportation. Does anybody feel bad for him? I don't. Neither should you. The truth is that we elected a president to do mass deportations. Are there some sympathetic stories out there? Yes. Should that change the policy entirely? No. Should one or two sympathetic stories dissuade you from mass deportation or bring you to, maybe we should do some case by case analysis? There's 50 million of them. You don't think that there are a few dozen sympathetic cases out there? And this guy's not even that sympathetic. I understand he served in the military. Did he get paid? Yeah. Is he getting treatment at the VA for his alleged PTSD from going to Panama? Yeah. And now he can go back to his country of origin. I'm not saying that it's a third world bleep hole. He's going to South Korea. It's a really nice country. He should go. 34 cases out of 50 million. Give me a break again. If you think that that is going to bring people over to your way of thinking, then you truly are through the looking glass. Truth is stranger than fiction. And, they try to say things like on top of these military people, they're doing things like deporting 86 immigrants, illegal aliens, who had protections from removal because they were brought to the country illegally when they were a child. They were brought here by illegal aliens as a child. You don't think that they know that they're an illegal alien? That they didn't have an opportunity to come forward? Yeah, they did have an opportunity during the Obama administration. And now they failed to do it. They got to go. All right, let's pivot over now across the pond to the United Kingdom, because let's talk some Shakespeare. This is a story from the Telegraph on a weird Wednesday. Headline: Shakespeare's birthplace to be decolonized after, quote, white supremacy fear. Yeah. Shakespeare's birthplace trust with his, I think, Stratton von Avon. I can't remember. It's been a long time. Shakespeare's Birthplace Trust is decolonizing to, quote, create a more inclusive museum experience. So if you want to go to the museum where Shakespeare was born, then you're not going to get the full experience because they're worried about white supremacy. The idea of Shakespeare's universal genius, quote, benefits the ideology of white European supremacy. Why? Because he's a white dude who wrote a bunch of plays? Celebrating Shakespeare's work is part of a, quote, white Anglo-centric, Eurocentric, and increasingly West-centric worldview that continues to do harm to the world today. The Trust has stated that some items in its collections and archives may contain language or depictions that are racist, sexist, homophobic, or otherwise harmful. Okay. I understand that this is in the UK, but this is the sort of stuff that's been going on for a long time. The DEI, the diversity, equity, inclusion. This is the death of everything important. That's what DEI really means. The white supremacy. Shakespeare? Look, are you a fan of 10 Things I Hate About You? That's based off a Shakespearean play. The Taming of the Shrew. Shrews may be a mean word today, but it wasn't in his time, because we use different words now that they didn't use back then. We're constantly changing our vocabulary. If William Shakespeare saw a bunch of kids doing 6-7 now, he would die. Do you like The Lion King? That's Hamlet. Yeah, hadn't thought about it, had you? Yeah. Rosencrantz. Guildenstern, or is it Guildenstern? Rosencrantz? That's Pumbaa and Timon. The story of Lion King is Hamlet. It has impacted the culture, and I don't think the Lion King is white supremacist. But I found another adjoining piece about the trigger warnings they're actually doing on behalf of Shakespeare over in one of our greatest allies, the UK, right now. Same thing. University added 200 trigger warnings to include extreme weather and mourning to Shakespeare. A couple of examples. Romeo and Juliet, they had trigger warnings because it contained death and suicide, knives and blood. For Macbeth, they said that there was trigger warnings for murder, violence, knives, family trauma, and suicide. This is a real news story in a real news outlet about a real university that people are probably taking out real loans in order to go to. I got nothing else. I got nothing else except one more on a weird Wednesday that I want to get to, because this one caught my fancy because I didn't know the answer to the question, and it's a little bit anticlimactic, but interesting nonetheless. It comes from Reason. What happens if there's a murder in Antarctica? Well, there's a law, not a law, it's a treaty, 1959 Antarctica treaty that says that no state can claim sovereignty over the frozen continent. Antarctic missions usually fall under the jurisdiction of their home country, but crime and punishment on the frozen continent have still gone in some pretty weird directions. So essentially, if the Americans have a mission in Antarctica and there's a crime, then the American justice system is going to hash that out. If the Russians are doing something, then the Russian justice system will hash that out. So the examples they give, 1996, the FBI sent agents to arrest a cook because he attacked a coworker with a hammer, and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. And then only 8 years ago, a drunken Russian engineer attacked a welder with a knife because the welder was ruining the ends of the books that he was reading. And this guy didn't have a lot of stuff to entertain himself. He wasn't giving any spoiler warnings, certainly not any trigger warnings. So he attacked the welder with a knife, and then the welder apologized to him. So they dropped all charges. Oh, all right. I guess all is well that ends well. All right, that's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals Podcast Edition. But guys, reminder, this is the one time. Do all those things, like, share, follow, subscribe here on YouTube, Rumble, over at Spotify at AmRadPod. I have a fun palate cleanse today. Truth being stranger than fiction. You know, sometimes truth is just funny and wholesome. And I present to you Miss Universe 1997, being truthful when she was asked a question.
Here's the final question. If there were no rules in your life for one day and you could be outrageous, what would you do?
I would eat everything in the world. You do not understand. I would eat everything twice.
I hope she won. All right, guys. Plan to be back with you tomorrow noontime. Until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals Podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.